Our first guest tonight, well, he serves on the House Committee on Foreign Affairs and just returned home after a 10-day bipartisan congressional delegation trip to the Indo-Pacific. They met with the Prime Minister of Japan, the Taiwanese president, who had just had a meeting with House Speaker Kevin McCarthy in California, and others. Joining us now to brief us on that trip and so much more, Congressman Mike Lawler from the great state of New York. Congressman, great to have you on the show.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
You just had this extraordinary moment on the world stage. You've gotten to see what our allies tell you they see in the United States right now, the leadership of Joe Biden. What's the pipeline of what our allies told you during this great trip?
Well, it really was a fantastic trip. We went and met with the Indo-Pacific commander in Hawaii. We saw our troops in Guam, and then went to Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And met with the heads of state as well as legislative leaders there in those respective countries. And we talked about the important relationship between the United States and our allies in the Indo-Pacific. And we talked about the context of the Russian invasion into Ukraine and the impact that that has had on the Indo-Pacific, and obviously, of course, China. And they are all looking for the United States to lead. And I think what we continue to see with this administration, frankly, is a failure to do that. One of the big takeaways from the Russian invasion of Ukraine was the fact that we did not move quickly enough to deter Vladimir Putin. And we knew he was building up troops on the Ukrainian border. Right. We did not arm the Ukrainians fast enough, despite promises to do so. And we're seeing the potential of a repeat with respect to Taiwan. And that's why this trip was so important to strengthen our relationships with Japan, with South Korea, our other allies in the region, Australia, the Philippines, Thailand. We need to be working together economically and militarily to make it very clear to President Xi that any such invasion of Taiwan or blockade in the Strait of Taiwan is not only unacceptable, but would be met with severe consequences. You got to keep in mind, 60% of international trade comes through the Strait of Taiwan, and over 90% of semiconductors are manufactured in Taiwan. They're our 8th largest trading partner. There would be significant economic impact on the United States were such an invasion or blockade to occur. So this is very serious, and we need to take it as such. And the Biden administration needs to do a much better job of working with our allies in the Indo-Pacific to really ensure there is strong deterrence against China.
Yeah, so important.
Congressman, the goal is typically for a presidential administration and the military to be in lockstep with respect to goals and methods and things like that. As you were on this trip and you spoke to Indo-Pacific Command and other parts of or other components of the military, as far as their concerns and progress and just the situation there, does that differ from the Biden administration's messaging, and if so, how?
Well, obviously, we had a number of classified meetings that I can't get into too much of the specifics on with our military leaders. But what I would say is this. It's very clear that we need to arm Taiwan and that we need to get them the equipment that they need and have purchased much more expeditiously than we are currently doing. And I think the sooner we can get that done, obviously, the administration needs to make that a priority. The more confident I think everyone will be in the situation in the Indo-Pacific. But more importantly, I think what our allies in the region are looking for is for American leadership and for us to bring together a coalition, a NATO-like coalition in the Indo-Pacific. That really will ensure the balance of power there and will ensure stability in the Strait of Taiwan, which is, as I mentioned earlier, critical with respect to international trade.
Yeah, so much important commerce flowing through there. Yesterday, I had a chance to talk to former National Security Advisor John Bolton. He said the same thing as you. It's really important that we build on the Quad agreements and try to create a NATO-like organization in the Pacific. And until we get it stood up, he said, maybe we ought to consider putting some U.S. troops in Taiwan just to create an extra deterrence. Did those sort of did that idea ever come up in any of the conversations you had with allies or the military that you could talk about?
Obviously, it's a very sensitive issue, and we did meet with the president of Taiwan, who had a history-making stop in California and met with Speaker McCarthy and a bipartisan delegation. There's certainly concern in Taiwan. They don't want to necessarily provoke China. And obviously, you saw China's response to President Tsai's visit to California, sending battleships and sorties and surrounding the island with, quote unquote, military exercises. So it's certainly sensitive. But I think one thing that is fundamentally clear to me is that we, the United States, need to be working very closely with Japan, who has doubled its national defense, going over 2% of its GDP, the third largest investment of any country in the world. South Korea, who has made clear that they are looking beyond the Korean Peninsula when it comes to national security. The Philippines and Australia, who have partnered with us in a significant way. You're seeing countries make moves to ensure the long-term stability in the region. And it's really because of the actions of President Xi and President Putin. They understand the threats that are emanating there. And so the United States needs to be much more clear about where it stands. Strategic ambiguity, in my opinion, is not working. And we need to be much more clear about the economic and military consequences of such an invasion. And I think, obviously, the potential for troops in Taiwan is something that should be discussed for the future. But right now, I think what is most critical is to get Taiwan the weapons and the training that they need to protect themselves, and also build the economic relationships on trade, on sanctions potentially against China, and also on manufacturing of things like semiconductors, right, which are critical to the global economy.
So important.
That's right. And becoming more and more important. Sir, yet another very important role that you have in Congress. You serve on the House Financial Services Committee. With this administration, this economy, it seems to be a numbers game with respect to the narrative that they sell the American people. But you cannot lie to the American people such that they don't feel inflation. They don't feel it in their pocketbooks. They don't feel it on the kitchen table. You serving on that committee, what's your forecast with that regard to in the rest of the year?
I'm obviously very concerned about recession and long-term stagflation. I think the Biden administration owns this. They increased spending by over $5 trillion. And the reality is you cannot just print new money and continue to borrow at the levels that they have. They created a 41-year record high inflation. And when you look at the fact that inflation was at such levels, and interest rates needed to go up to combat inflation, you see the consequence of that with Silicon Valley Bank and the collapse of long-term treasuries as a result. This is significant, and we need to get spending under control. It's why the whole debate around the debt ceiling is going to come to a head, because we need to have long-term spending reforms. And mind you, Joe Biden, when he was vice president of the United States, negotiated the raising of the debt ceiling on behalf of the Obama administration that included long-term spending cuts. And so he should have no objection to doing the same thing, given how much money they spent over the last 2 years.